Look, it's great to be back, and I want to thank Sheep Genetics for the opportunity to talk today. Okay, so as Karis mentioned, this work is building on the work I've been doing with the Ramping Up Genetic Gain project, a collaborative approach which has involved not only myself but the girls from Sheep Genetics and Will previously, Daniel, and also Dave and Stephen there. Okay, so I've put the Twitter thing there as well for those that like to summarise the world 140 characters at a time. Please feel free to give it a plug. But what I really want to talk about today ties into what is the theme of this conference, improving the rates of genetic gain. And I think it's important when we focus on that, and that's our outcome of what we want to take out of the next 2 days, what is it that the good actually do well? So what I'm going to talk about, one, how I did it. It's no point just sitting here and me telling you without actually giving you some sort of context about exactly how I've come to the conclusions that I'm about to present. There are no steak knives, I might be clear from the outset, but it's really important that we know that. What impacts gain? So there's a whole lot of variables. I'm going to talk about what those key ones are and what their impact is between those that are making genetic progress and those that are not. And then finally, where do we go from here? Like, that's nice, Luke, you've told us all this stuff, but what's it mean for me today? So that's what we're going to talk about. Happy to take questions at the end. But first of all, why are we actually doing this? What is the importance of genetic gain? Why is Hamish being held accountable to doubling the rate of genetic gain in the livestock industry? Why are the girls being, I guess, held accountable for 2% index points, 2% gain on index each year? And the first one is this sustainability. And I'm not talking about the environment, but I'm actually talking about what the sustainability is of your enterprises. So costs are going up, add CPI. If we are not going forward, guys, we are going backwards. That's the simple fact. So we need to be continually making progress to stay competitive and to stay sustainable in our market so that we can keep doing what we love doing. That is the key thing while we're all here. We care about what we do. It needs addressing, and why I say that is because Swanee 8 years ago did some work where he showed that we weren't making the gains that we possibly could be doing. That is why it is a major KPI for industry. That is why it's a major KPI for Sheep Genetics, and that's why it should be a major key performance indicator for your business. And when we actually look at that in dollars, that is lost, that is actually going to hit you in the pocket. And finally, why it is important is just because how much variation is out there. And that was the thing that really blew me away when I started looking at this work. So let's actually ponder on that for a moment. Just how big is that range in genetic gain in the industry? Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'll talk through this graph. This is the index points per year over the last 5 years. And so what I've done is I've looked at what the top 20% on index points per year gain have made and what the bottom 20% have done. And as we can see here, significant variation. So our people that are in the bottom 20% aren't necessarily going backwards, but they're not going ahead at the rates that we really want. We're talking about indexes, and I'll touch on which indexes in my next slide, but it's important to note that if we're looking at dollar terms, such as if we are with our maternal dollar index, times that out by the amount of ewes you're joining per year in your flock, the thousands start racking up, maybe even hitting 5 figures there. Okay, so you can see it doesn't matter the analyses, there are significant differences between those that are using the information to make solid genetic gains and those that aren't making it as a faster rate. So how have I come to this data? So using the project, what we've been able to do is use the information that you put into the database and the information that comes out through the diagnostics. So what we've done over that 5-year period, we've averaged out a key bunch of variables, which I'll talk about in my upcoming slides. We've filtered some of that information. Not every flock qualifies or has the level of data that we need to be able to demonstrate that. Then I've started to look at what those relationships are in terms of what's making gain and those that are not. And then finally, using a little bit, I guess, of industry knowledge, why is that? What is the reasons that the top 20% are doing this and the bottom 20% are doing that? Okay, so what got a jumper? What made the cut? And this is the two things I really want to focus on. They had to have 3 years worth of data in the analysis at least. So if they're only a 2-year data, that doesn't really give us enough accuracy to make a long-term estimation. We've only included commercial flocks. And by that I mean there is no information nucleus flock data in our project, and there's also no sire evaluation project data in our project, as well as some of the key research flocks such as the breech strike, etc. And the reason that I've done that is because those flocks don't necessarily have the objectives that we're looking to achieve through this, and also that our basically we want to do this, they're looking at a year-on-year proposition as opposed to a long-term thing there. So on that, I've looked at the key indexes that we're using. So the Merino Production Plus index is what I've made all my merino comparisons on. Carcass Plus for the terminals. For our maternals, it's the maternal dollar, and then the Dooney index there. And just to finish, I have included our international flocks that are subscribers as well. So when we talk about just how many flocks that are, you can see here that's not all the flocks that you see when the team are going around with their regional forums putting up the data, but you can see that there is enough information there that we can really get a decent understanding about what the good are doing well and what they're not so good at doing. One thing I will touch on right now is, so we have our terminals and maternals here. I haven't looked at within breed differences in the purpose of my talk today, because it's the same as I guess within breed variation is as much variation as a crossbreed. Okay, so here's the big result first. Okay, the no-brainer. High indexes doesn't mean faster gain. And what I mean by that is, for the average index of your flock, what is the relationship with the index trend? But there is variation, and that's why I put the little star there. So in our terminals, it's around 46%, which is the strongest of the lot. The Dooneys come in second with about 26% variation there. Our maternals are around 15%, and for the merinos, no relationship. Squat, zero, donut, capiche. And what I really want to say is this graph looks at those flocks on their average index. So if we work left to right, you've got what the top 20% are doing, and then the bottom 20% on average index, and you can see that there is a lot of variation within that cohort of flocks. So when we're looking at merinos, we're talking about 40 flocks either side there. And there are those that are making gains consistently, and there are those that are actually not making gains at a faster rate. And you'll see that goes across the whole way. But what you will notice is that top 20 do have, I guess, a slight higher average than what the bottom 20 do in terms of that index trend a year. Okay, so what actually impacts gain? Now, I'm not going to give you what the secret sauce is today, because there isn't one. Okay, there isn't the Luke Stephen recipe for cooking, and looking at my size compared to when I last spoke here, you wouldn't trust it anyway. But what this is all about is a couple of key factors as I see it. So looking at all these variables comes down to three areas of information. Sorting out your pedigree. What are you actually doing when it goes before your lambs hit the ground? How is that set up? And with that, we're talking about full pedigree, obviously all the other variations of pedigree along the way, and how much pedigree do we actually know about. Talking about sorting data collection. How is our data set up to maximise the efficiency of our investment in our programs? Big one here, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then finally, that's nice. I've sorted my pedigree, I've recorded the information, and what am I actually doing with it? And that's also where there are some glowing differences. And that's something that we all need to sit back and think about. Okay, what is it that we need to do to make sure that if I'm investing in my breeding program, I'm actually getting the full return from it? So how much does this all explain? And as you can see, it doesn't really matter the analyses, they're all fairly similar, but it's not one. And I think that's fairly important to note right now and take the bull by the horns. Why isn't it one? What is ASBVs? They're a decision support tool. A tool to be used in a whole range of things. So obviously we make selection decisions that aren't necessarily solely based on the best animals. But what we do see as we look through is that there are a range of different variables impact that graph on index trend for different analyses. They're not the same. That's why there isn't the secret sauce. That's why there's not that. It will be fairly evident as we go along that there are different variables that clearly have an impact on those that are making gain and those that are not. So first of all, sorting pedigree. And this one, you're probably going to say, well, you tell me something I haven't told you, Luke, before. And what this is all about is I'm going to touch on two key factors. What the percentage of full pedigree is in the flock. And the reason that I'm saying that is because when you have full pedigree, you're making less assumptions. Okay, it's not that you just know who the dam is. We can start to build a bit more of the picture. What was its birth type like? What was its rear type like? Key factors that impact on the expression of phenotypes, so the data out, that then drive your ASBVs. Remembering that if we're not sorting that stuff out, it's going to have an impact on the accuracy of the information that we're recording and using. And then the other thing that is key is increasing pedigree depth. Now this has two factors obviously. So when we're using outside genetics, how much of the picture can we paint? Okay, if we can put more paints, more colours on the canvas, we are a lot closer to having a masterpiece than if we're just painting in black and white like I used to get hit around the head for, which is why I'm here today and not working in an art gallery. Okay, so let's look at this. Full pedigree, the top 20% and the bottom 20%. And as you can see, something jumps out. I'm seeing a few smiles, I'm seeing a few nods. There are significant problems in our merino industry, guys, with how much full pedigree we're recording. But it is important to note that there is variations in these. So there are still people that are making gains that aren't necessarily recording full pedigree. But what are they doing? They're probably using the data a little bit smarter. In our maternals and terminals, you'll see that there are differences. They're not as big a range, but they are fairly significant. And we know that in terms of who here's put animals in the land plan before without a sire or a dam. Surely someone has. I know it's leading breeders. There we go. Yep, our breeding values aren't as high, are they? No. And Doonies, you can see, are probably not as much variation, also tying in with how the analysis is structured there. The pedigree known, so this is basically if I know an animal and I have 4 generations worth of information, how many of those 16 fields can we populate? And so you can see here that, once again, big differences between how much of that back data is known. Now this, as I said, in merinos, articulated before with our no pedigree problem, but when we think about terminals and maternals, this is where bringing animals from outside land plan in, where this has a real impact on how you're driving gain. So if your selection criteria is that you look at flocks outside of land plan for your genetics, you have to try and bring in as much as possible. And guys, I'm pretty sure that no one in this room as a leading breeder buys a ram without at least having some information of knowing who the dad was. Every little bit you put in just helps paint the picture. Okay, so that's the information around sorting out the pedigree. I haven't talked about what the differences are in syndicate pedigree and no pedigree because it all comes from the full pedigree, guys. Those relationships, basically turn them upside down. Our people in the bottom 20% are recording more syndicates and they're also not recording pedigree. So what we're talking about with recording the data, 2 things here. So one, recording more traits, which is about improving your index accuracy towards the objective. The second point is actually making those records count. So if you were spending money to take weights or do fleece weights or carcass scan or even better, reproductive records, as Daniel said earlier, you've got to make them count, guys. And what that is about is how much of that information you use, how are your groups structured in terms of the amount of animals and how many size you've got represented in that group. So when I'm talking about those valuable records, that is pretty much it. So you can see here, it doesn't matter which group analyses we're talking about, anywhere from about 10 to 15% difference in effective progeny performance. And what does that mean? it means that that animal's record isn't contributing as much as the value of its sibling records. So when this is a great feature, I think, of the Data Smart workshops in terms of, well, this is an area I need to address. How do I address it? How are your groups structured, guys? Sit back and look at this information and see, have I got decent size represented across my groups? Have I got as many sizes as I have? Index accuracy. So when we look at this, you'll notice that, I guess, relevant to the others, the terminals are a lot higher. Pretty simple reason for that one being that we've used Carcass Plus. Carcass Plus, all our traits that we select on should be measured. Relevant to our other animals, obviously, we are in our merinos, our maternals and our doonies, that we have a lot of information that is recorded later in life that we don't necessarily record on our full cohort. But once again, guys, there are noticeable differences. You will notice that is with the exception of the doonies. And there's a valid reason with that, guys, which is how their breed is set up, that they record the information and have to record it on the cohort. So basically, this comes down to that last point there at the bottom of the slide. You need to measure those traits that are impacting on your objective. It is not good enough to say that I'm self-replacing if I'm not really putting any focus on recording reproduction and identifying those dams that are weaning you more lambs. Okay, so we're using the information. We've recorded it, we've done our pedigrees, we've sent it to sheep genetics, we've got our information back in whatever format. And what does this come down to, guys? Ultimately, using the data, okay? So selecting males, and that's getting value out of your investment. And then there is selecting your females, which is getting the true value out of your investment. Because remembering that the female is half the equation, guys, and if we're not focusing on our females and the role of them, we are actively crippling that rate of gain. Using them earlier, faster turnover, a little bit harder to achieve in our dams, but as I show in our male information, there are the differences there. Okay, so selecting the data. I think it's fairly important that I define this before we get into it. So let's rank all our animals on index. Our average animal is 0, our best animal is plus 100, and our worst animal is minus 100. And if we're selecting animals from the top, we basically take that average of what is the average of the selected animals versus the average of the best animal, and we come up with a percentage. So if we're looking for 5 size and we pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we get a 100% selection efficiency. If we choose 5 of the 10, 50%, we go down. And this is the part where I'll say that it won't always be perfect, okay? Because if 5 sires are all by the same, those 5 animals are all by the same animal, are we going to use all 5? We might, but we're looking for variation, so probably not. Okay, what's the other part of this? Is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a selection tool. You will make selection decisions outside of the breeding objective. So if we're talking about merinos, we have 3 different types. So there's 3 different objectives. If we add other traits that are not part of the breeding objective, so worm egg counts, for example, in some of our indexes that aren't there, and we use that to make selection decisions, that's not reflected in what I'm going to present, but it does impact. So the male selection efficiency here, as you can see, there is significant differences once again, surprise, surprise. Around 9 to 10% here, but that's the average. What the maximum that people are making is around the 50 percentile. So if we're doing structural assessment, that's not too bad, but as an industry, we need to lift that, guys. So what that comes down to is, if you do get the information back from industry, from Stephen or from Ermias, use it. Don't just get it, put it on a pen card and display it for your clients to do. You're doing the work for them without getting the benefit of it. And that's only further, I guess, amplified when we look at what's going on with our females. Here, much lower, guys, much lower. This is the thing that is the my take-home message for all of us, look at how we're using our data in our females. Please. It'll make these guys' job a lot easier. It'll make Hamish's job a lot easier if we're making gain and we're getting those benefits. So as you can see, we've got some pretty low numbers there. We are selecting a large number, so you will see that that won't be as high, but we are once again people getting around the 30 percentiles for their female selection efficiency. But in this area, guys, the highest I think I saw was around 8 or 9. So, you know, basically not using. So when it comes to the average age of our sires, you'll see that there are some differences. They're not massive amounts of information there. And my take-home message here is that you use young rams, that's been said before, where possible, but not for the sake of using young rams. Okay, so if you have genetics in your disposal that are of a superior genetic merit, use them by all means. Okay, it's nice to get younger genetics into the system, but if those animals don't stack up to what you've got, that is just taking risk for the sake of risk. And I'll just finish with this bit on the females. I haven't put merinos, what the bottom 20% are doing, just because of the significant amount of non-pedigree there. So there isn't really enough data to make an accurate comparison, and no real differences, guys, between the others across their other differences there. So that's well and good. So where to from here, I guess? I've hopefully shown a bit of information. So what we need to focus on as an industry, as leading breeders, merinos, pedigree and using the info. Pretty much everything. We need to do a better job. With our terminals, we can lift that selection of our male. Our maternals, it's about making sure you've got as much information there on your animals to improve that index accuracy. And then the Doonies, it's about managing that level of co-ancestry, or what the inbreeding is. And I haven't just picked these out of the air, guys. What I have done is, when I've put this and looked at it, this is what the significant factors are, and the most significant for the relevant breed groups and the relevant breed types. That's nice, but what are we going to do? What's my take-home message? I really want to challenge you on point 1. Know where you stand. Similar to a breeding objective, if you do not know where you are, then there's no point worrying about where you want to go, because you may already be well along the way. So one of your action items will be touch base with the team at Sheep Genetics, or touch base with your service provider and get access to this for your flock. Okay? That is my take-home message for you as one of my key action items out of investing in your time here. Identify the holes in your area. Okay? Find out what it is that I need to focus on to lift the performance of my breeding program, and then get the maximum benefit out of the investment. So that realise, okay, if I've got holes here and I've got other areas in my business that need to do it, what is the maximum benefit I can get out of investing in that? And if you have another area that has a better return on your investment, then follow that. Okay, so if I was to pull $10,000 out of my Skyrocket and put it on the table right now, don't go and just put it straight down their throat. Okay, identify where your issues might be, and maybe it is, okay, I need to work better on selecting females, I might invest in mate cell. Okay, pedigree might be an issue, I'm going to work on DNA parentage or genotyping to improve my index accuracy. Okay, don't just spend it for the sake of it. Look to get the maximum benefit. And that's what we're talking about in the second stage of this work through the CRC, is helping people identify what the benefit is to their business, tailored to their objective. So I'd like to pull up now. I want to thank you all for your time today. And I always finish with that one, because this was written about sports, but it's exactly the same as what we do. Nothing beats genetics. Thanks, guys, for your time today, and I hope I've been able to give you something to think about.
Thanks, Luke. I think it's great to be able to show a lot of the proof of what we've been talking about at regional forums for a number of years now, and put that back on the breeder to be able to see where they actually stand. Quick question, where do you see stage 2 going in a little bit more detail?
Okay, so once that last point about knowing where we start, that's what this is about. Okay, so looking at the diagnostics for your breeding program, the next stage is, okay, if I want to go in this direction, what is the benefit that I'm going to get out of that? And if I do tailor it to my objective, as opposed to what might be an industry-derived objective, you might see that there are differences there. So worm egg count's a classic example of something that we will be able to put into this to follow towards a particular objective. So you can see, okay, well, I select on worm egg counts, and that's why my projection's going in this way as opposed to what the standard Merino Production Plus Index is. How then can I make my next selection decision?